Welcome to today's presentation, Beyond the Checkout, Creating Next-Gen POS Solutions with Continuous Delivery and Habitat. Let's go ahead and get started. Steve, why don't you kick us off?
Thank you very much, April. Hello, everyone. Happy holidays to you, and thank you for joining today's presentation. We've got a very exciting agenda that we're going to get through in a little less than an hour. So we're going to start off with just some introductions. So I'm Stephen Hollins. I'm with Chef Software, and we have a lineup of speakers today that I'll be introducing you to in a moment. For the agenda, we are going to kick it off today with Michael Hedgpeth, who is a software director at NCR, who's specifically going to go through changing your mindset around POS systems. So we're very pleased to have Michael today. I want to thank Michael for joining us and look forward to his portion of the presentation. We're going to be followed by going into some details around how we measure success when delivering applications to POS. We'll go through Habitat specifically, which is a Chef solution that's built around application automation. We will go into a demo, and then we will move over to the Q&A, of which I will moderate, and just be sure to put your questions into the Q&A section, which you can find at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to as many questions as we possibly can. Two things that we want to achieve here today, and we have two objectives. One is we want to get you thinking differently about POS environments, and number two, we want you to understand how Chef specifically is helping with application acceleration in these environments. So right now, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Hedgpeth, who is our first presenter, who will be followed by Jeff Fote, our solution architect, and Scott Ford, our principal solution architect. So Michael, turning it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm excited about this webinar because this is a topic that I really care a lot about and that we've been talking a lot about between NCR and Chef. A little bit about me. I am within the hospitality division of NCR, so I focus on restaurants. I've spent the last 15 years there, and so delivering innovation and technology to restaurants is something I care a lot about and something I think about every day. I'm going to start out our discussion. Chef asked me to talk a little bit about the context as I see it within the retail and restaurant space. Some challenges that we face, and what types of solutions that exist within that space. And I'll start out just talking about two customers. So recently I was traveling and was able to eat at a restaurant opening of one of our important customers and talk to their leadership who was there at the restaurant opening about what they were thinking. And they had a very lukewarm approach to technology. So we're NCR, we're a partner for technology with them. I asked them how it was going. It's like they said, okay, it's going fine, keeps the lights on, kind of taking an approach of technology being a little bit of a necessary evil. I contrast that to another meeting that I've had recently with a table service, casual dining customer of ours in the Denver area, and their CIO is way on board with digital-enabled transformation of their business. They're thinking of things from labor savings to different delivery models, all the way in between. So they are going to take a digital-first approach to their business, and NCR is a partner of that transformation, and NCR is the main partner for that transformation with this customer of ours. And this individual views technology as a necessary component of the business transformation that they need in order to survive into the future. As we all know, we've all been disrupted by technology, and we have to change in order to keep up. So if we look at these two types of customers of mine, we can kind of draw some conclusions. One of them is looking at IT as an efficiency gain, and that's kind of the traditional model that we've all faced in these businesses. You might hear over and over, like, if you're in a restaurant, we exist to make food. We don't exist as a technology company. And there's a big part of that I would agree with, because I'm with NCR and we provide technology solutions for retail and restaurants. And so I don't want a restaurant to develop their own software that we already sell to them. But at the same time, viewing technology as a necessary evil or just as an efficiency gain, I think misses the point. If we compare that to somebody like Google, I don't think Google is, or a digital native business is really thinking in terms of efficiency gain first. They think of how to make the pie grow bigger, or revenue first, how to become more innovative to create more channels into their business, and then they build efficiency on top of that added capacity. So if I compare that to how the other customer dealt with things, so they're looking at IT to power their business into the future. And that's you think about Amazon, who's kind of the big elephant in the room in this space, who many people are afraid of. And Amazon, their big core competency is their technology platform. And so if we are able to build technology platform for our businesses, then we will be able to compete with companies like that. And so taking that approach, you're basically borrowing from the digital native or cloud native types of businesses, and you're applying the principles that they have used to make themselves successful into your own situation. Another thing I hear quite frequently is people in the retail and in hospitality industry can often think of themselves as different. And this is a pattern I hear a lot even in the chef community when I talk to other chef customers, is, kind of the thought of, you don't know about my problem is different, so I can't do this stuff. I think that if you're looking at IT through an efficiency gain lens or through a necessary evil lens, you probably are different, because it's a really hard problem to get point of sale devices in hundreds of sites updated rapidly. But if you're looking at it through a lens of enabling business transformation that you need to do in order to grow the top line or revenue, then you've got your answer right there. And so if I compare the CIO conversation that I had a few weeks ago of the CIO that gets it, they're treating their restaurants as dozens of data centers or hundreds of data centers in their situation that they own. And they're thinking, the CIO is thinking in a data center or cloud oriented mindset about his restaurants. And that mentality lets you borrow all the best practices that are in data centers into this world. One of the key outcomes that you would think about, or key elements of whether or not you're thinking in this way, is that this first customer would probably think of trying to release as infrequently as possible. So they'll release every 6 to 12 months. It will be painful because that's a lot of change. And but because it's a necessary evil, they're trying to limit the amount of change inside of their restaurants. If I compare that to this other customer that I deal with, the CIO is wanting to change more frequently, change all the time. Well, how can we have a pipeline of innovation into a restaurant where we can fit the demands of our business as we transform? And so my overall thesis for this discussion is that you have to treat your restaurants and stores as miniature data centers, and you should be applying industry best practices into that space that we apply in the cloud or we apply on-prem or whatever. And when I think of three things that you really need when you're looking at doing this inside of restaurants or stores. First is the idea of you need to become application focused. So rather than try to boil the ocean, what parts of your solution do you need to deliver rapidly? And with an application focus, which is mapped very well to business value, you create a solid pipeline going into various environments where there's not a lot of manual intervention, but there's a lot of automated safety to keep you from shipping the wrong thing to production or shipping something that is not high quality production. And then finally, you need an orientation where you deliver holistically. So you should be able to create partnerships, hopefully with us at NCR, where you use our point of sale or use our plugins for the point of sale. And that shouldn't stop you from being able to deliver quickly, but you have to integrate us and all the other partners you have into that pipeline, and so it's not just your own stuff. One of the things that gets me really excited about Habitat is that it checks those boxes very well. They have Chef Incorporated has created a great tool for applying the best practices of digital native companies like Google, Facebook, and within a retail hospitality context that you could use to facilitate change that's needed to be competitive. So I'm really excited to hear Scott and Jeff present that model more deeply.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us. It's really interesting stuff. My name's Scott Ford, and I am a Principal Solutions Architect at Chef. I've been with the company for about 5 years, and in my role, I've gotten the opportunity to travel around and speak to a number of different companies. And I find companies are definitely on the same path that Michael's describing here. You're either at a place where you've fully embraced this digital transformation and you're headed full steam towards it, or you're realizing now that there's really no other way. We have to start embracing technology and getting bold with it. Now, one thing's for certain, in this digital transformation, no company has ever gotten there without automation. It's absolutely fundamental. We know that the way that we want to make change now has been, the foundations come from automation. We store that automation in source code. We iterate on it. We get better as an organization over time with it. And of course, that's really where at the heart of what Chef Software is all about. Our infrastructure automation framework has been around for 10 years now, and we've continued to grow our business into other areas with InSpec, which is a framework for codifying your policies that your infrastructure and applications have to adhere to, compliance policies, and being able to codify that and continuously test your infrastructure and applications. And then, but if we think about where we are right now, what Michael's talking about is the business value is really in the applications. The applications are quickly, they're becoming the interface we have between our business and our customers. So everybody needs to get really, really good at delivering applications continuously. And that's including Chef Software. This is a transformation that we've undergone internally in the last 5 years that I've been here, watching the way that we deliver our premium products out. The best features and capabilities don't mean anything if we can't get them out to wherever we're delivering them to. And so when we think about that process, we want to also think about how we measure that success. First and foremost, speed matters, right? If I've got a feature, I want to get that out into my customers' hands. I have a belief that this feature is going to provide value. But if it's not going to provide value, I want to be able to get that feedback loop as quickly as possible. I want to double down on the features and capabilities that are providing value for my customers and get rid of features and capabilities that aren't providing value. So speed matters. First and foremost, when we talk about speed, it's just how quickly can I deploy my changes? Can I, as soon as I commit a change, how quickly can I get that out into my environment, to my customers' hands? The other thing is efficiency. So when we think about when we're pushing changes, how often do we have failures in those changes, and how quickly can we detect them in the process? And once we detect them, how quickly can resolve those? So the efficiency part of it. And the other part is the risk. So we think about what we're dealing with these days. Every week you're hearing about new major hacks onto businesses' infrastructure. security, compliance, they absolutely matter, and it's just a fact of life. When we think about what we've done traditionally where we test once an application has been deployed, that's just not good enough anymore. We have to be able to test for compliance and security continuously throughout the process, and that goes from the developer's laptop throughout all the way until the change is delivered. So as we're talking about this, as Jeff continues on with the story, we're always thinking about shifting left. Do as much as possible as you can on the local developer's laptop. Be able to build your application on your local developer's laptop. Test that out. Test it not just for functionality, but test it for security and compliance as well. And be able to then take that, whatever you're building, and get that out into the other environments. Now, all of this too, of course, there are major cost implications with this as well, so that we can actually drive down costs. If any of you have been on the phone that have been on teams that are, trying to troubleshoot an application release problem in the middle of the night with hundreds of people on a bridge, what if we could have solved that by one engineer being able to test it in a sane manner on their local development environment before a change was ever pushed out? So with all these changes in applications and the way that we think about that, Chef has been focused on this for the last number of years, trying to think, there's new technologies, there's microservices, there's platforms, Pivotal Cloud Foundry, there's Mesosphere, there's all these different technologies that we see companies are considering. Of course, all the legacy stuff still exists. We've got bare metal systems, we've got VMs, and so when Chef went to really look at this challenge, we decided to be bold. Not just how does Chef fit into each one of those different platforms that our customers might be interested in, but how do we look at the challenges that we're facing at a much broader, more holistic view? And what we did is we really focused in on 3 different areas, and that's how do you build your applications? How do we make an artifact out of our applications that we can run, we can test all the way on the left? If I have that artifact, I want to be able to deploy it wherever I need to deploy it at deploy time. So whether that be onto a bare metal system, whether that be, oops, sorry, I think it's jumping around here. Sorry, there we go. Whether it be deploying out to bare metal, whether it be deploying out to Docker or to Kubernetes or to a VM somewhere in the cloud or a VM on-prem. And then once we have our application deployed, that's not enough, right? There's all these other things we have to think about of our applications. It's the lifecycle management of it. We have new versions we want to push out. There's configuration changes that we might need to make to our applications. We've got things like service discovery and being able to bind to other services. We've got topologies that we need to think about. So the outcome of our focus on this problem about taking all of our learnings of infrastructure automation, compliance automation, is a new open source project called Habitat, which allows application teams to package up their applications into an immutable artifact that they can deploy into any environment. And I mean any environment, whether that be an on-prem data center on a VM or in the cloud, or export out into other formats, including microservices. The way that we build applications with Habitat is, first of all, we start up with what's called a plan file. A plan file is it's just a shell script that describes how to build your application. We build for both Windows and for Linux environments. So when you're building an application with your target platform is Windows, you write a PowerShell script, and for Linux, it's a shell script. This plan file describes how to package your application up into an immutable artifact. That artifact includes everything that's configurable about my app, the lifecycle events, or we call them lifecycle hooks, where our scripts like steps I would take to initialize my app before I run it, a run hook to describe how to run my app. We can also package up things like health checks and smoke checks along with that with our application. Additionally, when we write our plan file, we describe all of the dependencies that our application needs to run. And Habitat, when we build our artifact, when we build a Habitat artifact, it pulls all of those dependencies into the artifact. So we have an immutable artifact that contains all of our applications runtime dependencies, the lifecycle hooks on how to run, initialize, smoke check, health check my application, as well as everything that's configurable about my app. That artifact that we build, we can run on our local laptops. Habitat has something called the Habitat Studio for building and testing out your Habitat applications. You can test that on your local laptop, and it's that same artifact that you're going to be able to then release into throughout your various environments. Habitat has something called the Habitat Depot for uploading artifacts, and every artifact that you upload into the depot is automatically tagged with a channel name. Out of the box, we give you the channel name unstable and stable, but you can tag them with any channel names that you see fit. They could be development, staging, production, and we'll talk a little bit about why that's important in the next slide. But once that artifact is in the depot, you can then take that artifact and you can deploy it to wherever you need. You can run it on bare metal, you can run it on VMs, you can export it into other formats, including Pivotal Cloud Foundry, Docker, Kubernetes, Mesosphere, and more. Once your application is actually deployed out, we have something called the Habitat Supervisor, which runs and manages your application. So we've described on the left on our plan how to build it, how to run it. When we actually load that artifact on a running system, the Habitat Supervisor is what runs the lifecycle hooks that you've written. So it will initialize the app, it'll start it up. If you've written health checks in or smoke checks, it will run those and make sure that your app is healthy. Now, the Habitat Supervisor can also be bound together into what are called service rings, where other instances of your service can find each other, they can share configuration. So if we described on the left what's configurable about my app, if I need to inject configuration into the ring in my development environment that's different than what's in my staging environment, my production environment, I can join each one of those rings into a different area. So my development ring, my staging ring, my production ring, and each can share configuration with each other. So by injecting configuration into the ring, all of the instances will do what's called choreography, where they will share that configuration around the ring until they're all configured correctly. Now, this capability of the supervisor, I'm just glossing over it. Jeff will talk more about this and show some in the demo, leads to some other really amazing possibilities with our technology. First of all, is we give you topologies right out of the box. So you can build your applications. If your applications support things like a leader-follower topology, you can build your application and deploy it out and pass in a flag -- topology leader. And at that point, the supervisor will recognize you're waiting for other instances to join into the ring. Once we have three instances that have bound together to find each other, you have quorum. And at that point, the supervisor will hold an election, and the application will elect a leader and followers. This requires no service discovery or third-party tool to be deployed into your environment. It works the same whether you're deploying in a VM on-prem or you're deploying in the cloud or if you're deploying in a microservices environment. You have leader-follower topology out of the box. Now, another thing really exciting capability, I talked about when we build these artifacts and we deploy them up to the depot, every artifact is tagged as unstable. And then we can further tag our artifacts with other channel names as we see fit. So when I deploy my application out into my development environment, I can have it listen to the development channel. And every minute, my instances will check in with the Habitat Depot and see if there's a new artifact that's been promoted to the development channel. And if there is a new release, the Habitat Supervisor could redeploy my application based on the update strategies either all at once, where all the instances will be notified that there's an update of that package and they will redeploy themselves, or we can do a rolling strategy where, again, one instance is elected to update itself, and if that passes, it will move on to the next, to the next, to the next, until all the instances in the ring have been updated. So Really a lot of amazing capabilities for us to show you today. When we think about this again, what is a habitat? What we've been doing in the past is we've been building our applications from the ground up. We think about, and what operating system are we going to deploy out to? We configure that operating system, we update it, we patch it. We have system libraries that need to continuously be updated and patched. We've then got the application middleware and libraries that we need to set up. And finally, we've got the application that gets deployed out on top. But if we think about the story that Michael was telling you, what we've been talking about at this point, the business value is not in the infrastructure. The business value is in the application itself. So that model that we've been doing in the past, it really doesn't fit for where we're headed. What Habitat does is it allows you to build your application from the app down. We start with the app. We package our application into an artifact that allows us, that has all of its dependencies that it needs to run. So if I've got Java installed on a piece of infrastructure and I package up my application with Habitat and it requires Java, my application will include Java in the artifact. Now, my infrastructure can have Java on it, but Habitat isn't aware of it. It will only use the version of Java that my application was packaged up with. So it makes these artifacts immutable. It makes them very portable into any environment. When you get your application running with Habitat on your laptop, you know it's going to work wherever you deploy it. So with that, I'm going to hand it off now to Jeff Vogt, and he's going to take us through a demo of packaging up a POS application with Habitat and then showing some of the capabilities as how you can roll out changes across your environment. Jeff?
Hey, thanks a lot, Scott. Always a joy to hear you talk. Scott, you have a very solid understanding of modern application design, and you're absolutely right. We are moving towards a future of application-centric design. It's definitely where the industry's going. Before I jump into the demo, I want to reiterate something that Michael said, which is that the most modern retail environments are treating their stores like mini data centers, and I think that's really profound. And the reason I think it's profound is I've been at Chef a little over a year. I've talked to a lot of companies. I'm in a customer-facing role. I see things kind of boiling down to a very simple generalization, which is that everyone's trying to push change to some form of compute. And so anybody who's able to really internalize that, they have the ability to then focus on the problem of just managing the life cycle of change. So that's being able to test change out in sort of a development environment, and then roll it out through progressively more production-like environments. And if you can think of your stores as these little mini production environments, then it gives you the ability to develop new changes in your retail apps that you can easily push out on the frequency that your most modern app teams are pushing changes out to their mobile apps, which gives you a lot of ability to sort of innovate in the retail environment. So let's take a look at what my demo environment's going to be like. So I built out sort of a simulated retail environment for a pretty small store with 4 retail branches, for instance. And I've segmented them into 3 regions. So we've got in the West, a store in Seattle with 1 POS terminal and a database. Our biggest store is in Chicago, 3 POS terminals and a database. Now, all of this is built just on some virtual machines in the cloud, just so I can sort of interact with them. But if you think about them, they're just IP addressable devices on a network. Now, unique to the retail environment, we've got some challenges. So number 1 challenge, network and internet connectivity. These stores, are just every store is going to have a different ISP, for better or worse. And so we need to kind of build for an environment where we are not so concerned with, always on internet connection and sort of like tolerant, network tolerant design. Number 2, these are machines that have been deployed over time. You've got different versions of hardware, potentially different versions of operating system, a huge range of potential, system libraries that are installed. Which can be very challenging when you're trying to deploy your applications. The other piece is you've got devices that sort of interconnect, which is hard to manage, remotely. So, within this sort of challenge, we think about what are some ways that we can simplify some of these problems. So the biggest way that we can handle, the library problem and hardware spread is to package our applications up alongside of their dependencies. And then the other way that we handle the problem of the interconnected dependencies, your multiple POS stations depending on a database, is we handle the declaration that an application needs a database in code, and we sort of let the internal network in the mini data center inside the store sort of self-manage it. And this is a very modern design, and with Habitat we can apply this design to any application. It could be legacy stuff or brand new microservice devices. So the first part of my demo, Scott went through that build, deploy, manage. So first I'm going to show you how to use a local development environment to actually build a artifact of a POS application and test it in a pretty production-like environment. The next piece that I'm going to show is how we actually deploy it out and how we can have control over the regions that we might deploy it to. This is going to use the concept called channels that Scott mentioned before. And then the last piece is I'll show you, how that sort of self-managed environment, what some people would call service discovery, works within the application. So let me share my screen. And I'm going to ask any of the presenters on the line if they can see my screen.
Not yet.
How about now?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
I see it now.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. So I am on a development environment. So this is, akin to, a laptop. It's a Windows machine, and I've got some things set up, but first and foremost, I'm just going to show you what this application looks like. So it's a Java application. It's an open source POS that we found just to put together a simple demo. And it's built to connect to a database. So we wanted to kind of show a multi-tiered application. And I haven't fired this up in this environment yet, so it's going to build itself a database schema on top of the MySQL database that's running. So let's take a look at what it took to build this application, and then we'll jump into kind of how we produce a new build. So I'm going to open my text editor here, and what we're looking at is the source code for a Habitat project, and that's everything under this Habitat directory. The first sort of core piece of Habitat is the plan file. The plan is your central, piece of information about all the details that go into the application. So you'll notice things like package version. You'll notice things like, package source. So in this case, this is like treated like a COTS app. So we're actually just going and straight up downloading a installer, an exe file. If we wanted to ship this alongside source code, that's another way we could do it. So these are sort of optional things. The next piece is dependencies. So it's very important in application-centric design to have your dependencies sort of live with your application. So in this case, I depend on the JRE and MySQL mainly for I've got to do a command line tool. We also have the ability to separate dependencies into runtime and build time, which allows you to pull down things like compilers without packaging those up and bloating your final artifact. And then we got some functions here to do some things which involve mainly extracting the exe and unpacking it to a directory. If you actually have source code to build, this is where you'd invoke your compilers. So in this case, we're just using an unattended extract of that exe, and then we're putting it into a special place where it will end up becoming a Habitat artifact. Some other pieces of this is templatized config. So you'll notice that I've got this line here that says I have a bind. What a bind means is I depend on an external dependency like a database. So I can now use this information in other things like configuration files. So this is the configuration file for this point of sale system. And you'll notice down here, the DB URL is calling that information. So basically what we'll see when I go to run this application, I will declare a binding on a running database, which is part of the Habitat network. And that allows this system to sort of self-configure. And if anything happened to that database and it got rebuilt and rejoined, then this information would sort of subscribe to that and self-update. The other piece, which Scott mentioned, is the ability to define runtime hooks. So this is, I've got a service. When I first install that service, I need to do stuff, which might mean moving some configuration files around, or in this case, I'm loading a start file onto the desktop. And then, I've got things like I'm going to make sure that my database has an initial just empty database for the schema to be deployed on, which is really useful sort of in the development context. And then things like running, I can actually, invoke my service to run it, and I can instruct Habitat how it would actually stop the service if there was an update. And so the combination of this sort of like dynamic configuration, hooks, declaring dependencies, these are all really modern ways to treat an application. But, as you can see, I'm using, just some exe file. The resulting artifact when I produce a build is something that can run on any environment. It can be a container if you had a microservice that was stateless, but we don't have to deploy on a container. So let me produce a build here. What I'm going to do, so we're looking at this version 5.8.5.7. I've gone and prepared a new version. And so what I've done is produce this in a branch, and there we go. So I should close this. And now I should see, okay, so I'm using version 95.1 now. It's the latest version of this Chromis app. And there's been some differences. I'm doing some different preparation steps. I'm no longer using, that unattended command line. I'm now referencing a var file. But, for the most part, the idea is I should be able to produce a build that is that I can test on my development environment and then push it to, out to my environment and see it, running in production. Very simple software lifecycle. So first thing I'll point out, okay, yeah, the app started, but we'll just minimize that. So what I'm going to do is enter a thing called the Habitat Studio. All this is just a place that's sort of preloaded with some Habitat environmental tools. So the directory is a special mount, but it's really just pointing to the source code of my app. So if we do if we look, it's just that Habitat directory. And if I look at, Habitat plan, it's the same one that we just looked at. So to produce a build is very simple. I just type build. So build's going to start working through that plan file. You'll see here, it's going and downloading that new exe. And underneath here, we're also resolving dependencies and things like that. And then, so during installation right here, this is just running that function here of invoke install. And then the output of the installation should end up in that special directory that I can then package up as a Habitat artifact. Or I should say that Habitat will package as an artifact. Now, one thing I want to note is, people think about Habitat in relation to like microservices, containers, and Kubernetes. I want to make it really clear, Habitat's not a virtualization platform or a containerization platform. It's really a framework that allows you to easily build your application to run from a specific directory that has the additional ability to depend not on your system libraries, but on the statically compiled dependent libraries that sort of live in the same directory structure as your application. But the point is it runs on the host operating system. So, this is a Windows example of something that is an application that you double click on. You'll see, go ahead.
So Jeff, I wanted to break in for a second. Chris Stone from Hitachi has a good question that kind of brings us from where you are into a store. In that, while we are talking about making stores data centers, a lot of times stores from a network perspective are really locked down for PCI reasons. So what is that connectivity? If you have something that you just built there, what is that connectivity from that thing to what a live restaurant or retail environment would pull down?
Sure. So what you'll see in a second is I'm going to, and that's a great question, by the way. What you'll see is that this artifact, I'm going to push to a artifact repository that is it's called the Habitat Builder Depot. And that's something that the commercial offering of Habitat allows you to run on your on-prem network. And it is your devices, your compute devices in your stores will check in with that depot for new packages on a regular interval. So you don't have to allow any new connectivity into your stores to allow this behavior to happen. And we're going to go through that in the demo. You'll see it in just a second.
Cool. And just to add to that, Chris, you might be thinking, well, why wouldn't I just use Artifactory or something like that? And technically speaking, you could. All these are just files with a HART suffix on them. And so you could do that. But the cool thing about the depot, as Jeff is getting ready to show us, is that you can declare channels. And so when I was talking earlier about that pipeline that you need, you're not just going to shove something somewhere and then all of a sudden all your sites get it. You're going to have to declare channels or declare stopping points on your pipeline to get you to where all your sites are in production. And so the depot gives you a really nice way to manage that in a central way that maybe something like Artifactory or a file-based thing would not do.
Excellent answer. Yes. Perfect. So this step that I just ran, so I unloaded the previously built version of my app, and then I reloaded the new version of my app. And so I can look at log files if I really care about that kind of stuff. But in the end, I can see, that it kind of stopped producing output. So I can trust that, the new version is deployed. And you'll see that it actually closed the old version. That was just an election that I made, when I designed the hooks. So you can see that I'm going to run my new app, and it found an old version of the database and it wants to update. I'm not going to bore you with letting this run through. The general idea is this would be where I'd normally perform like some sort of QA stage and then push it to, the next environment. So let's take a look at what that actually would entail. So the first thing I'm going to do is hab package upload. And this is an interaction that I'm going to make with that supervisor, or I'm sorry, with that Habitat Builder Depot artifact store. So I'm going to paste the path to that heart file that was created, which again is just sort of like a zip of the application and the metadata around all of the run hooks and configuration and dependencies. So this heart file does not contain the dependencies. When we actually go to run it, the Habitat supervisor will resolve all of those dependencies and download them sort of one by one. So this will take just a second to upload. So the nice thing about that is, your actual artifacts, become very, very small. That's a comparison to maybe sort of like a Docker, where, if you're moving Docker images around, it's sort of that whole operating system. Whereas this is just the application, and then the individual pieces are sort of cached. And then once this uploads, the next step that I'm going to do is take you to an environment where I can sort of see an inventory of all my applications and sort of validate the state we know that, the new production version of this is going to be that, 0.951 that we just built. And so this is going to be uploaded to this depot, and then we will go and log into Chef Automate, which is sort of the visualization tool for all of the Chef tools. So what we did is we wrote a compliance test using a tool called Inspec. And the compliance test does some validation of the system for things like CIS compliance, but it's also doing a validation of the actual version of this POS that's installed. And we can see that we're failing everywhere on all of our nodes. And we can go in and see the code here, but we're saying, it should be 0.95, but we're still seeing this old version. So that means we have to do a promotion. So the promotion is really simple. So we're going to do hab package promote. And it's going to be this specific version. And then I'm going to say stable central, because that's the first place that we kind of want to, do sort of a canary deploy to. And so all that's happening is the metadata on that artifact store is changing. It's saying that now any device that is running Chromis Win that is subscribed to the stable central channel should go ahead and download the new version of that application and self-update itself. So again, that connection is established from the store out to the wherever the builder depot is running. So what we should see in just a second, if I click on compliance, we'll start to see some nodes actually checking in. Let's see. So here's Milwaukee, one of the Milwaukee nodes. If I hit refresh, by now we should probably see most of them. It sometimes takes a second. It's about they check in every minute. And so you're kind of, when you're demoing lots of devices, you may have to wait that full minute to see all of the nodes check in. And I'm going to try one more refresh. We should see everything. Okay, perfect. Well, they're starting to filter in, and we're seeing, Central Milwaukee R1 and R0 and Chicago R1. Those are checking in. And we can even do things, as the sort of administrator of this environment and actually log in, using remote desktop, for instance, to one of these nodes. So this is, my Milwaukee point of sale 0 station. And I can open up Chromis and see, connects to the database. And here it's just like we saw on that production environment. I can make it a little bigger, where it detected that the database needs an update, and that would be something that you would make a more robust package where it would sort of self-update. You'd orchestrate that. But the idea is, without touching the stores, without pushing anything to the stores, they subscribe to the channels of the software that they need, and actually are able to pull that information down on their own. So, the last step of the demo, which I'm just going to kind of do, but I might open it up for Q&A since we're sort of at the 10-minute mark. The last piece that I'm going to do is promote this code to the remaining regions. And so sort of as we go through Q&A, we can kind of start to refresh this environment. And hopefully what we'll see is that, everything is starting to pass. In fact, you can see all of the central nodes checked in, and now we're just going to see the east and the west. So yeah, I'll leave this up, and then if I want to, I think I'll turn it back over to Stephen to go through any Q&A if there's any questions.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you, Jeff. There are some questions, so I'd like to go through. There's about 4 that we have unanswered right now at this point. Number 1, how is this different from Docker?
Right. So, and I touched on that a little bit. The technical answer is that this code actually runs on a host OS. The software runs without any virtualization. It's a way of packaging your app so it connects to its dependencies locally without relying on any sort of system libraries, which the main advantage there is you can build, stateful apps like databases. You can take legacy apps, COTS apps. There's no dependency, that they run in any sort of container engine, which is very nice.
Yeah, the thing I like about Habitat in this context is that it kind of gets you into a Docker-like mentality without having to force everything that Docker comes along with. And so some teams that are interested in Docker or microservices architecture, I will encourage them to use Habitat as the first step of that. Without containerization, just straight up on a VM.
And maybe the last piece to add is if you're defining your applications in a consistent way. So if every application is, written with a plan file and has a place for hooks and has the same way of config and can understand, expose things about itself to the network, like I'm a database or I'm an application, and or if you're a load balancer, you can subscribe to applications starting and stopping. If you think about a multi-platform application, a multi-tiered platform, you may have microservices running in Docker, and you may have legacy stuff not running in Docker. Because we can export to Docker means that you can define your applications consistently, even if some of them are not running in Docker and some are, because of the ability that we can export to Docker.
Great, thank you. And the next question I have is, my organization is currently looking at solutions akin to Habitat, like Pivotal Cloud Foundry. Are Habitat packages compatible with PCF? And what advantages does Habitat have over PCF?
Sure, Scott, I don't know if you have a better answer on PCF, because I think you have maybe more experience there.
I do. Sorry, just in case there's any background noise. So what I'd say to that is kind of akin to what you were talking about in the Docker microservices story, which is that when you package up your application in Habitat, PCF just becomes a destination for deployment. So you can use the same workflow of packaging up your application on your local laptop, and then if PCF is the right destination, then you can go ahead and deploy it out to PCF, or at that point, then pivot to a container or microservices. So rather than, while we have lots of customers that have PCF deployed out, if this allows you to have a more holistic workflow for all of the applications, rather than a specific workflow for that deployment environment.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott. And Michael, I believe you had another question.
No, I didn't actually.
Okay. So then I think we're good on the questions. There were some responses internally here that we've given back to your folks. So at this point, Jeff, if we want to finish up, we should be good on questions, but I'll continue to monitor as we wrap up.
Great. Well, I'm done on the demo. I've actually turned off the screen sharing. Just to kind of recap, I guess I can, show everybody again, that environment that I built, and then, run through again, just what I actually did during that demo. So, I've got this environment, multiple regions. I was able to build a new package on my dev environment and sort of prove that it worked, do a little QA. I skipped, normal steps that people would take to actually, go through a pipeline and things like that. But then I showed how we could deploy it sort of in a staged way based on channel. And then we looked at, how that application actually sort of self-organizes within its deployment area, how to, connect things like database and application together without doing any manual configuration. So, these are three huge pieces to sort of solving, automation. Again, when it's just change and you need to get it to compute in that very general mentality, Habitat's a great way to sort of describe all that in one place as code, which is critical for these sort of high-performing IT organizations.
Thank you. Hey, Jeff, I'm going to take one more. There was one more question that just came through, and then we're going to wrap up. So there was a question around, the statement really, exporting to Docker, meaning it's also in line with a UCR or non-Docker, but more LXC-centric, et cetera. Not limiting is the point, correct?
I'm not too familiar with some of those terms, but the general idea is like we want you to be able to package your application and not limit you to how you actually run that application, meaning that artifact, I can run it all day long on my dev environment. I can push it to bare metal servers and see it run there. And then I could package it up in Docker and throw it into Kubernetes and it'll run exactly the same way. So that's, when we talk about not limiting you on how to deploy your application. I'm not sure if I answered your question well. And I don't know, Scott, do you recognize those terms UCR and LXC?
Universal Container Runtime. Yeah.
Okay.
I would just say that a lot of people get stuck on the technology. Like we're doing Kubernetes or we're doing Docker, and it's really about the patterns that get you to deliver quickly. The technologies are just sort of containers for that pattern, to borrow that term. So that's what's cool about Habitat is you decouple that. You have good practices decoupled from your technology, and then you just ship those through the technology as a platform.
And Chris, if you have more specific questions, I would love to reach out and talk afterwards. If you did want to do a deeper dive into the technology, I could definitely put together something where we've got somebody that knows containers better than me. So I'd be happy to do that.
Great, thank you. So Jeff, is there anything else prior to us closing out the session?
I am good to go. Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for our speakers. Michael, thank you so much for joining us and assisting in today's webinar. Really appreciate everyone today for their time. This is a recorded session, so we will be sending it out as a follow-up. And if there's any questions you may have, please let us know. But happy holidays to all, and thank you very much, and we wish you a great day. Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.